So tell me about yourself and about the firm and what you guys do that are similar to other folks, what you guys do that are different from other folks, and then we'll get into some of the kind of industry stuff.
Yeah, I mean, as far as myself, you know, on a personal side, I'm married. I have a 5-year-old son. Keeps me plenty busy. You know, I've been in the industry. Started in the industry back in 2006, I believe, on the in an adjuster role. Had my first deployment in like 2008 out in Texas, and then we've been running ever since. I was an IA for many years. You know, got into doing disputed claims, which is kind of where I felt like my niche was. I live in Miami. I was born and raised in Miami, so to me, my entry and subsequent exposure to the claims world was always revolved around some sort of a litigious, you know, looking at things from a litigious perspective. You know, the rarity down here is that you don't have a policyholder that's represented either by a PA or an attorney, even on the front end. So we're, you know, kind of became accustomed to that sort of an atmosphere. In 2000 and I believe it was 2011 or 12, I started working in, I was subcontracted by Citizens as an IA, but dealing with their DFS mediations. So I was dealing with all of their, I was handling all of their Miami-Dade DFS mediations, and occasionally filling in as a corporate rep when the lit side of the house was overbooked or short. And that was an interesting experience. I learned a lot doing that, but it also opened my eyes to the front end claims handling deficiencies that were almost kind of repeated. You know, we were kind of seeing the same self-inflicted wounds time and time again. That was a real eye opener for me. I eventually I was eventually offered that position as an in-house W-2 employee staff, which I took. So I did work for Citizens for a couple years there, which was a fantastic experience. And
so that would have been 2010-ish to 12-ish.
You know what? It was probably late. It was probably later than that. Now that I'm thinking, it was probably like, I probably took the DFS role in 2015 or so, maybe 2014, 2015, somewhere in there. Because I left Citizens in early 2018, right after Irma. After Irma, they sent me down to Key West. I was down there for 3 months working at the satellite office down there. They put us up at the Margaritaville, so I can officially say that I lived at Margaritaville.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so that was a nice experience. But
did you slip on a pop top and had to cruise on back home?
I cruised many locations after work. I'll tell you that. Sometimes a little wobbly, but
yeah,
it was
well, what a fun place to be.
It is. You know, while I was down there, I was in an examiner role. So, you know, I'm very fortunate and grateful that I've had the opportunity to kind of see the claims perspective from a number of different roles, right, which I think has been, you know, really beneficial. After that, I was asked to go into a QA role. So I left the DFS role and went into QA at Citizens. So I was overseeing all of Broward County, all the staff and independent field adjusters and the field managers. Did that for a couple months. And you know, during that whole process, I had been working on my contractor's license. That finally came through in 2018, I believe it was. And you know, seeing what, you know, my exposure with the litigated claims and disputed claims, kind of seeing what had what had transpired from the front end that had caused the litigation on the back end.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times I would see reports from experts, whether it be a contractor or an engineer, and I would say like, man, we were in a better position before we engaged the expert. And I just felt like we had an opportunity, there was a niche there to maybe do that better, kind of bridge the language of claims and the language of the construction world and the technical aspect associated with that, in a manner, communicate those aspects in a manner that the average claim professional could understand. And obviously not step in it, right? When you're requested to do something from an expert perspective, not put the carrier in a worse position from an exposure perspective. And therein was the reason that DDA Forensics was born. Really just to kind of try to, bridge the gap between those two languages and create something that was still delivering to the client what they wanted, but in a manner that was tailored for claims.
So you guys work exclusively for carriers?
No, we've actually done, when the company first launched, we actually did a lot of plaintiff work after Irma. That's what I really enjoyed about doing, being in that DFS role, right? That I could kind of Monday morning quarterback a claim, right? And kind of see all the deficiencies and kind of make it right. If the carrier underpaid or if it was, if the coverage was improperly assessed, then we had the opportunity to correct that wrong. And if the carrier got it right, then great, we got it right. I mean, we stand on that, and we stand on that defense, and it is what it is. But I'm very strongly of the belief that it doesn't matter what side you work on, if the side that you work on doesn't make something right or something more true than not. To me,
the facts are the facts.
The facts are the facts. Doesn't matter who's paying your bill. That's the way we've kind of always approached it, and as it would have it, maybe taking that approach has caused us over time to have less and less plaintiff clients and more defense clients or carrier clients. But we just kind of call it like it is, man. And whoever the client is, whoever that's good for, great. Whoever that's not good for, then you're probably not the right client for us.
As I listen to you talk, I am reminded of a discussion on LinkedIn last week that was about appraisal and lawsuits and the difference in the rest of Florida versus just Miami-Dade, Broward County. And I think I might have been talking to you. I don't remember if you remember that thread or that post, but it sounds very similar to what you're speaking about right now. And basically, as I recall, the original post was about the much higher propensity of litigation in those counties compared to the rest of Florida.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And someone said, and this had to do with Ida, I believe. And Miami-Dade was on the east side of that, as I recall, or, it wasn't in the very heavy wind area. So it was surprising that there was so much higher litigation in that area. And someone said that it was because the carriers had taken a position that they would send disputed claims to appraisal everywhere but there, which I didn't understand what the rationale might be behind that. And I'm not sure where the conversation went from there, but, it was an interesting perspective, and it was interesting to hear someone say that collectively that the industry would have decided to do that. I mean, do you remember that, or if not, what does that topic, what do you think about what was stated on that topic? And does that make any sense that they would have a different position about how they handle claims in every county except those two?
Yeah, I think it revolved around the fact, one of the comments which kind of struck me was that this was that particular article was an opportunity for the carriers collectively to put out a soundbite, right? That Miami-Dade and South Florida is so bad with the litigation. When you look at it purely from a claims perspective, and I believe it was with Ian, those claims on the West Coast, there would be no question as to cause there, right? So any payment or subsequent dispute would be privy to appraisal, because that's the appropriate vehicle for scope and price disputes. So it's no surprise that there was more appraisal, more files pushed into appraisal on the West Coast than there was in Miami. In Miami, I live in Miami. I was here during the storm. There really, really wasn't a whole lot much different from your typical, severe thunderstorm on a summer month. It wouldn't surprise me that there would be more litigated files in Miami from that, because there would be coverage disputes as opposed to just scope and price disputes.
Correct. Yeah.
So, to make the assumption that it was an orchestrated move to put out a soundbite, I think that's, I told the gentleman that he was probably giving the carriers too much credit to plan for this thing.
It's quite the conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
I can't put together any logic of why, if it were true, why? What good does a soundbite do? What does that get you? And is it targeted toward politicians and regulators, or is it targeted toward, plaintiff attorneys? Is it targeted toward the consumer? Who and why would they do that? It just doesn't really make any sense.
No, it doesn't. And you know what kind of the question that I believe I posed is, the question is, why are there so many litigated claims in Miami-Dade County with respect to that particular event, when the wind speeds were, I think I said, like, my Ryobi powered leaf blower can produce higher wind speeds. Then
I do remember that.
If I can get up on a roof with my Ryobi leaf blower and cause damage, there's a problem that's inherent in the roof, not related to the wind speed. But it was just a little bit of a silly jab, just to kind of drill down on how, in my view, kind of ridiculous that position was. Everybody's entitled to it, but I just didn't see the like you said, the logic behind it, or who to whose benefit is it to place that story there.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, because it didn't make sense to me either.
Yeah, I would agree. So
going back to the origins, what led you into claims? It was like 2006 to 2008 was your first deployment. And so just real quick for me, I worked my way through college in the restaurant and bar business, and that's flat out what I wanted to do. And when I graduated college, I went straight to work at a restaurant, and I worked there 6 months. I'm like, there's no way in heck I'm gonna, this is not the life that I want. And so I did a lot of soul searching, and it probably took 6 months till I landed a job in claims, and I was making $1,400 a month working as an adjuster for the state of Louisiana. And, I made more money. I kept tending bar on, either a Thursday or Friday and Saturday. I made more money doing that, but I just absolutely love claims. And, so here I am, I guess 30, I don't know, it's scary to think about it, 30 something years later, still in it in a much different aspect, but I still love claims. And I think, for a lot of people, they're like, it's the worst job in the world. On people on the outside that haven't done it. For people on the inside that have been in it for more than a few years, we see something that other folks don't see, and we just love it. And so, what's your story? How did you fall into it?
Oh, that's always a loaded question, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah. So I would go back even further. My parents, when I'm the oldest of three brothers. When we were young, my parents made a big sacrifice to start investing in properties, and it started with one property, and then two, and then three, and we were just trying to make it work. So my parents actually put myself and my brothers to do a lot of the work right along with them, because they didn't have the money to hire a contractor. So I was on I was cutting tile on a wet saw when I was like 10 years old. Laying tile, when I was 10, 12. And we did a couple homes like that before we actually had the funds to actually hire somebody to do it for us. And therein kind of started my my entry into the construction world. And I think by default, the claim side, much like you, when I was out of high school and early college, I got into the restaurant business.
Is that right?
Yeah, so I was a server. I was a server for many years, and
you learn a lot working in that business.
You do. You learn a lot of people skills. You screw up. You got to face the client yourself. So
you learn a lot about working efficiently.
And working hard.
Working hard, a lot of hours.
Yep,
no doubt about it.
So I think it probably 2005 or so. My mother had become a mortgage broker, pretty successful at that. And, like a good mother, she was trying to say, hey, you should look at this, and trying to steer me away from the restaurant business, late nights and whatnot. So she said, you should talk to this gentleman. He has a real estate appraisal company. You should look at that. So she set me up with him. I went on a couple ride-alongs and eventually got my real estate appraiser's license. And a couple years in, the market crashed. 2007, 2008, we had that crash.
Mm-hmm.
The work kind of dried up, and I took a job, which in hindsight probably wasn't the best. I took a job as a mortgage broker with Countrywide Home Loans. Shortly before they collapsed. So
Countrywide was just killing it.
They were well
before they weren't.
Until they weren't. And I just so happened to walk in the door, maybe a month or two before.
You caused it.
Clearly. Clearly, it was a bad move on their part. And that kind of came crashing down in dramatic fashion. And I just kind of was taking odd jobs, taking jobs with foreclosure banks, and getting up at 5:30 in the morning, and I had a list of 200 properties all over Miami and Broward, and I would literally just drive in front of the house, and I'll never forget, it was $1 per house. I would just drive in front, take a picture, move on to the next house, and it was barely just enough to cover my gas and
$1.
Pay a credit card bill.
So you drove in front of the house and you just took a picture. This is for what purpose?
It was some foreclosure company. Basically, all these houses that were going into foreclosure after the crash, they just wanted a picture of the front of the house. I couldn't tell you at this point what the purpose was for. I just remember that I would just drive in front of the house, take a picture of the property ID, the house number, and take a picture of the front of the house. Move on to the next one.
Interesting.
And I would do maybe 200 or 300 of them in a day.
That you mentioned that, and I think to those of us that were exposed to that at the time, leading up to the what was it, Morgan Stanley failure, and Countrywide behind that, but some of my clients who had the most business were working for Countrywide. And we always looked at it as, wow, that's an awesome account to have. And in retrospect, you can kind of look at everything like this and see what an indicator that it was of what was looming ahead, right? Yeah. But I never thought of it that way. I just, you never put all the evidence together and said, man, the country's in trouble.
Yeah.
Miami's in trouble. Florida's in trouble. Countrywide's in trouble. But yet they got guys like you that are doing hundreds a day, which to me means they had to be very proximate, which tells you about the density. And so it's sort of like you said, when you look in the rearview mirror, you're like, oh my God, how did people not know? And people knew, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. People made tons of money off of it, but
Yeah, way too much, way too much centralized risk for any one company to hold. But that that didn't last too long. And I had a very close friend at the time that had just started in the claims business. I had gone to high school with him, and he was up in Jacksonville at the time. He had come down to Miami to visit his family for Christmas. We had a little gathering, and he said, "Hey, how's business going?" I said, "Well, it's non-existent. That doesn't exist." So he said, "Look, just started doing this claim stuff with insurance." I said, I'm down here. I got a couple claims while I'm down here. You're used to being out on the road on your own with the appraisals and stuff. Why don't you come out and see if you like it? Maybe you can come basically be my assistant. We'll work out an agreement." And I said, "All right, let's go do a couple ride-alongs." Did that. And in the process, I had been interviewing with Wachovia Bank at the time. And I had gotten the job. I had interviewed. I had gotten the job while I was doing the ride-alongs with my buddy at the time. And they said, "Hey, you got the job. Can you come in and sign some paperwork?" And I called him and I said, "Hey, listen, I got offered this job. Do you think that this is really going to work with you?" And he said, "Well, theoretically, if I have your help, if I can close more claims, I can get more claims, and you can start to learn." He's like, "I think it'll work." And I said, "No, I'm going to reject this job. This is going to work." And that was my entry into the claims world. I trained with him I was under him for probably about a year and a half, 2 years, and then got my license, and therein started the journey. So
that's awesome.
By chance, by pure chance.
Well, and it's funny like that when you get an opportunity, and just like you said, you got to make it work. So you go all in, and, when you don't have those options, the road is paved for you and you give it your all. So congratulations.
Yeah,
made the right choice. It sounds like you have no regrets, right?
No, much like you, man. I feel like those of us that love what we do, we're obviously very fortunate in that sense. But I love everything about the industry, all the nooks and crannies, and dealing with policyholders, and the gentle ones and the not so gentle ones alike. The catastrophe events. It's my wife always tells me, she's like, "I don't know how you do what you do." She feels everything very deeply, and she's like, I couldn't do it." And that's the job. That's when we have an opportunity to really, take the load off of a stranger and kind of carry it for them, even if for an hour and a half, 2 hours. It's rewarding.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I've always looked at it that way and said, and it's kind of funny, but it's kind of perverted, I guess, that when a storm starts brewing, you get excited. Because it's an opportunity to make some money, but it's also an opportunity to help a lot of people. And I think for me, being from Louisiana and born and raised and having gone through these things my entire life, and then, as a young adult, having to go through the insurance claim process myself because of a storm, you can't help but have that empathy, and you can't help but understand the situation that these people are going through. I'll tell you a quick story real quick. I had a friend in, and I'm going to rush through this. I'll probably screw it up, but I had a friend of a friend in from San Francisco. It's probably 15 years ago, when in the early years of E-Claim, and he was a snowboard instructor, and he would drive to Lake Tahoe on the weekends. And we got to talking about what I did, and I was telling him, and he was like, "You run a software company in Louisiana? Like, why would you do that?" And I'm like, "Well, why do you go to Tahoe on the weekends?" And he goes, "Well, there's no snow in San Francisco." And I said, so when you live through these events, you really understand what the person's going through. And I feel that empathy element of what we do is critical to it. And, the money, I honestly don't know how the money is at the time. I remember back in the day when I was really early into the cat business. I mean, it wouldn't be surprising to make a couple of grand a day plus.
Yeah.
But and this will be a good segue into the next topic that I want to cover with you. But I don't think that adjusters have the opportunity to make that kind of money today. And I think because of that, it's led to an influx of real talent. And, so there's lack of training. There is a lack of people who are willing to come in and work the way that the old guard used to work, the 7 days a week, 15 hours a day. And it's because the pay isn't what it used to be.
Yeah.
I see the fee schedules today. They're not nearly as good. I see a lot of, and this is probably, in the long term, a good thing for the industry, but there's a whole lot more desk adjusting that's happening now. But because of that and that bifurcation of work between a desk adjuster and a field adjuster, you're naturally going to have fewer field guys. And when you have those fewer field guys that boots on the ground that are handling the higher value claims, if they're not super experienced and they're not doing a good job, then the claim is kind of doomed from the early days. And, you were saying earlier when we were talking about how you've been able to see, what I call the good, bad, and the ugly of claims handling. So you've seen it from all sides for all the reasons. And it sounds to me like you're of the opinion that there's been a diminishment in the quality of claim handling, and that's led to more of a litigious state. And, I understand the argument from both sides that, the litigation financing and the proliferation of plaintiff attorneys, and for all those reasons that the insurance industries in Louisiana and Florida are both suffering because of the litigation. But, I use the analogy of, well, I won't say the analogy that I use because it's probably not PC. But it's a supply and demand kind of thing. And if you have the environment where people are being paid fairly for their claims and they're being paid promptly, there's not going to be any attorneys there, or very few. But when you have an environment where, first of all, it takes 2 hours to report a claim, you're on hold for 2 hours, you're speaking to somebody who doesn't understand, they're just reading from a script. So there's absolutely no empathy there. You got insurance villages, which are just, hey, look at me, take a picture of me next to this tent. They don't do anything to help you. Or this camper, they don't do anything to help you with the claims. There's not any intelligence out there to say, this is what you should do. Here's when your adjuster is going to be out, or really give you any hope in the claims process. And then, you've got a lot of people coming out that are scoping that just don't really know what they're doing. And so you create that environment where it opens the door to the plaintiff attorneys that are going to come in and they're going to say, the quality of the claim handling is going way down. I'm going to come in and I'm going to sell my services to these people that are already unhappy. So in my opinion, it's a two-way street. I'd like to hear, your thoughts on that and what you've seen. You've been in this business for quite a long time now. And, in your opinion, has there been that diminishment of talent and skill set?
I would agree with that sentiment generally, yes. One of my biggest frustrations, kind of seeing it from different perspectives, and especially going from that role handling DFS mediations into QA. One of the more kind of eye-opening or jarring realizations is the lack of communication within carriers between front-end claims handling and back-end claims handling. That communication and an opportunity to coach and teach personnel and say, hey, look at this particular claim file. This is what happened on the front end, and these were the repercussions of those actions or inactions of that handling on the front end. Look what it caused on the back end, right? That opportunity to teach and say, hey, you didn't get this photo, right? Or you didn't address this, or you did X, Y, Z, and that caused this on the back end. That communication back and forth is not there. And in my opinion, those are opportunities to coach and teach that are being missed, that essentially just lead to the same self-inflicted wounds that are occurring over and over again because we don't take that opportunity to teach. You know, that was a big thing for me that continues to be.
So let me ask you real quick. So when you were working QA, were you doing that directly for the carrier, in this case, Citizens, or were you QA for the IA firm?
No, I was QA for Citizens. I was in-house staff at that point, and yeah, and I would take it upon myself to, you know, we were required to do a certain number of ride-alongs with adjusters or meet them at inspections, and I don't recall what those metrics were at this point, but you know, that was I loved doing that. I loved going and meeting an adjuster out at their inspection and just shadowing them for a day. You know, if they had maybe 2 or 3 inspections in a day, you know, I just kind of hang back and watch them on the first one, give them a little feedback, say, you know, hey, this was a water loss. Did you see how, you know, did you see how the countertop interfaced with the backsplash? You know, if you pop that off, what does that mean for the countertop? You know, just little things like that. You know, if it's a water loss, you know, is it coming from the P-trap? Did you check the faucet from underneath? Was there any entry of moisture in between the interface between the sink and the countertop? You know, just
so that almost sounds to me like the role of a team lead. And
almost,
and I wonder, you know, so in our software we have that's actually one of the roles as a team lead, and then, you know, you can assign 10, 15 adjusters to a team lead and vice versa. And then that sort of morphed, you know, my anecdotal observation, and because I'm not in the game anymore, right? I'm just the software guy, so I'm not out in the field, and I can't say specifically this is how this company operates or this carrier mandates that you structure your IA teams. But it seems like there's been a transition away from the team lead role, and there's much more focus on the QA, and I think that's to increase the cycle times of the time that the report gets submitted to the time you know, it gets the next actionable point. But I don't see as much utilization of what I knew traditionally was the role of a team lead.
yeah, I would agree. You know, you know, as an IA, I worked for a small IA company, also doing their QA reviews. You know, prior to working for in-house for Citizen, I think that generally there's quite a bit of lost opportunity, or maybe not so much a lack of opportunity or missed opportunity, but an understanding of really what creates exposure, right? And I think the field adjusters that are out in the field, you know, we're taught to document the damage, right? But I always say documenting what is not damaged is just as important as what is damaged.
Yeah.
And that lack of understanding of, you know, what creates an opportunity for a lawsuit. You know, what creates an opportunity for a PA or an attorney to go in and pick off and say, hey, you missed this, right? And basically, I always say the exposure is the easiest way that I can figure to understand it is, what should you have paid that you didn't pay? And if you didn't pay something that you should have paid, then you're subject to litigation. And the lack of understanding in that, especially operating in litigious markets like Louisiana and Florida, if you are not cognizant of that, if your field team is not cognizant of that, then you're at a disadvantage, because the market has become so savvy. The consumer has become so savvy that the basic policyholder now understands, and especially Miami-Dade and Broward County, that I just need you to make a payment, and then I'm gonna take you to the cleaners, right? And if that claim is not buttoned down tight, you are going to get sued.
That is such an interesting point. I've actually never thought of it that way, but so what you're saying is, you make any payment, you got the coverage open and the causation open, and now it's just a matter of scope and price.
Yeah, I mean, and the consumer, and I can tell you a part of it specifically in Miami-Dade. And I always say it has almost become, you have to understand the culture of the market that you're operating in. Obviously, Miami is a very Hispanic, Latin culture. And, you know, I'm Cuban. My parents, both Cuban. I can say that the Cuban American is very of the mindset that, you know, hardworking, you know, they wanna get ahead, but they also don't want to feel like they're getting jerked around. And if they feel like they're getting jerked around, they do not mind going to war, even if there's no benefit for them. They're just going to want to make you hurt if they even have the perception that they're being jerked around.
In principle.
Yeah. So, you know, understanding the market and the consumer that you're working with is important, you know, especially when you're dealing with claims and the consumer is as educated as they are in Florida, and in my experience are beginning to get in Louisiana, specifically in New Orleans, because I've worked there. I've worked storms in Louisiana a couple times, and really the last time that I was out there, I was shocked with the progression and the questions that I was receiving from some of the policyholders from the first time that I was out there in like early 2008 to just recently in 2022. I think I was out there whenever the last big storm was out there. You know, the progression and the savviness of the policyholder and the very pointed questions that they were asking. I could tell that there was definitely a progression in the consumer.
Interesting. It's not a bad thing. You know,
No.
they need to be educated. And, you know, I think as an industry, if we did a better job of educating them instead of the plaintiff attorney and the public adjusters, we'd be in a better place to begin with.
Yeah.
And I don't see any effort toward that, frankly. I often wonder, you know, why the industry as a whole doesn't do a better job of public awareness and, you know, public messaging, you know, not just before and after a storm, but all the time, to educate them about the value of insurance and how to use it and what it's for. And,
Yeah.
you know, I don't see that. And it's not because the money's not there. But, you know, you see plaintiff attorney billboards everywhere. You can't turn on the TV without a commercial for this plaintiff attorney or that attorney. And, you know, the insurance carriers, they advertise, you know, for sales and pricing, but, you know, they don't collectively do anything about claims.
Yeah, you know, it's not like you said, Thomas, it's not a bad thing that the consumer is educated, right? Like, consumers should be educated. You're buying a product, you know. That's a topic for another day with respect to the agents and the agent communicating to the consumer what you are buying. You know, giving them the pros and cons. But you know, I'm a firm believer that right is right, regardless of what side you're on. You know, the policy owes you to get placed back to a pre-loss condition, no better, no worse. That's what you're buying. You know, the fact that the consumer, if the carrier screws up an indemnity payment and short pays or improperly assesses coverage, then you deserve a right and an avenue, a vehicle by which to dispute that. I think it's great. We need to get it right on the carrier side. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. And if the policyholder has concerns, then it's up to the claims professional to explain it, you know, and sit down and, you know, you may not get through to every policyholder, but if you take an extra 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, doesn't matter. If you just sit down and educate that consumer, it's probably the first time that they've ever had that opportunity to be explained what the policy covers and not covers. They may not be happy, but at least they walk away knowing that, hey, maybe my agent screwed me, so maybe my gripe is with my agent instead of my claims guy.
Well, I think that's a great point, and you're right. It is a full topic for another day. But you know, when you look at the diminishment of coverages and what's happened with deductibles and policies and exclusions, just as necessitated by the survivability of the carrier markets in both of our states. You can think whatever you want about that. You know, from a business perspective, was it necessary? Um, Again, I'm not here to say it was or it wasn't, but from the perspective of someone who's gone through a big loss like that, and you know, so you know when you bought the policy, you got a 5% deductible, but did you do the math and did you understand the ramifications on that? Did you understand the type of coverages that were being excluded? And at the end of the day, and I can tell you this firsthand, I don't even remember what the storm was here, but you know, we had what I would call significant damage to the house. Not structural or anything, but you know, shingles blown off, gutters blown down. And we had an adjuster that came out and he probably wrote up most of what I would have expected him to write up. And I think it was a $20,000 or $30,000 loss, and you know, below deductible. And it's shocking, right? Even for a guy like me, I'm like, oh my God, you know, so we get nothing out of this, right? And so for your average consumer who buys a policy and they think, you know, I've got coverage here and I got a storm hit, it had nothing to do with me, it's an act of God, and you know, this is why I bought insurance, and then you get uh a below deductible. It's pretty hard to take it, right? And it's pretty hard not to look at your insurance company and feel like somehow, you know, you're not being treated fairly. And again, I think that opens the door to the plaintiff attorneys or the public adjusters, and they're going to come in and they're going to say, we can help you. And I feel like if the insurance industry as a whole did a better job of educating the consumer about these things in advance, it might not be as much sticker shock.
Yeah.
And so they don't know what's in the policy, and they buy insurance based on the cheapest thing that you can get, if you can get coverage. You know, there's not a lot of competition, there's not a lot of options. So you know, you're going to go with a couple that will write the policy, and then you're going to pick the one that's the cheapest, generally speaking. And then you get what you pay for. And oftentimes, you know, you get hit, you suffer a loss, and you get nothing. It's tough.
It is, you know, and I've worked enough of these storms, you know, throughout the years, and you know, you hear the same things, right? I've never filed a claim. This is the first time,
Right.
and, you know, or you know, my agent sold me this. I can't believe this. I can't believe that. You know, I empathize with those individuals, because it's tough. A lot of these people sometimes are, you know, scrounging by, just making enough to pay those policies, you know, and now what do? So the human aspect of that is certainly not lost on me. You know, it's crazy, it's unfortunate, but you know, from a, you know, switching from that perspective to the claims professional perspective, I would say that, you know, it's incumbent on the claim professional to say, or to tell them, look, there's a lot of damage here. You may discover things that may not be visible now, you know, if it is under deductible. And unfortunately, I had to have some of those conversations when I was working Irma in a desk role. You know, hey, it's under deductible, but there's a possibility that when you start to get these quotes, you know, for the repair that needs to be done, if you get the quotes and they exceed the indemnity payment, please give me a call. We'll reassess it. If we need to, we'll send somebody back out. You know, try to soften the blow. A lot of times we have those hard conversations, and I understand you got 300 claims on your desktop, and you know, I'm sorry, the claim is under deductible. We're going to send you a letter, and call me if you see some other damage. Click. You're probably asking for them to hang up that phone and you know, look at their TV and see an ad running and call that first person that pops across your screen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? A little empathy, a little bit of time, right? Just gives you the opportunity for that policyholder to come back and say, okay, I understand what he's telling me. Let me go out and get these quotes and see if it changes the opinion, right? As long as you maintain, in my opinion, active, clear communication with the policyholder, it lessens the opportunity for that policyholder to run out and get representation. At the end of the day, they may do that anyways, but at least you give yourself an opportunity to work the claim. And I think that's part of the problem, Thomas, like you said, with respect to the lack of quality personnel out there, and the lack of desire to work the claim, right? I'm handling a claim now. It's been going on for probably 6 or 7 months, and we keep that particular carrier keeps coming back and saying, hey, they came to us with this. Do you think it's warranted? Yes, it may or may not be warranted, but you work the claim. Don't just close the book and say, no, I paid my last payment and sue me if you want. You're going to get sued. Work the claim. If you work the claim to completion.
That's the thing. You're going to get sued. These people aren't just going away anymore. And I thought of something as you said that about, it's sort of the perfect storm with COVID, because in my opinion, again, if you look at the macro level, unemployment is at historic lows. But if you look at the labor participation rate, which tells you how many people actually want to participate and who are out there looking for jobs, it's really, really low, which means there's a bunch of people sitting out there that they basically don't want to work. And I've seen a diminishment of the quality of service in every single aspect of what I do. You go to the grocery store, you go to a restaurant, you go to a drive-through, you go to a dry cleaner. I mean, you go to the hardware store, you name it. There's a bunch of people that they don't say hello. They don't say thank you, except for Chick-fil-A. Thank you, Chick-fil-A. But, just in general, and that clearly in my mind is post-COVID, right? So something happened there with, people got out of the workforce and they're gradually trying to bring people back in, but they're untrained and they're not trained in such a way that they truly know how to provide service. And if it's true everywhere, it's certainly true in claims. And I think that on top of the fact that so some other major trends that I see are, of course, with claims technology. And it's a good thing, and it will be a good thing for the industry long term, that technology is going to replace a lot of what people were doing. But I feel like over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been technologies that have come out that have displaced adjusters, because they now do the things that a lot of adjusters used to get paid to do, right? Remote inspections, self-inspections, drones, all those things. And I'm not against technology. I would say I'm in a technology space. But I don't think enough thought was given about what happens to those folks that can't make the money that they used to make, and they've left the industry. And so now you're bringing people in. And I think everybody would agree the training is not there the way that it used to be. And like you said, the ride-alongs, the team lead, the teaching and the seminars for CAT guys in particular. I deal more with CAT than we do on the daily side, so I can't speak to that. But handling CAT is so very different from handling daily. I say this all the time. It's not daily claims times 10. It's an entirely different lifestyle. It's an entirely different way of working. It should be an entirely different set of cycle times and deadlines and rules and regulations and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I guess that's a really long way of giving an opinion that actually was meant to be as a question. And tell me what you see in the field right now, because I'm out of it. But like I said, anecdotally, I read stuff on LinkedIn and I talk to people that I know that are still in the business, and it's just changed a lot.
Yeah, it has, from my perspective, and I've been out of the daily claims scene, direct handling for a while myself, but obviously we do get the opportunity to see these files on the back end. And yeah, I mean, training in my opinion, has a lot to do with it. There's a lot of programs out there that I see from time to time and say, come to a 1 week thing or a 2 week thing, and then you get your license and you're off on your own. And it's, that may work in certain regions of the country, but it's a recipe for disaster in areas like Louisiana and Florida. You're just asking for it, right? You're sending those poor guys and girls out, out into the field, and they're meeting with a PA or an attorney, and they're just foaming at the mouth. They're salivating, right? They're like, sure, give me the reglaze on that one window, and now I'm going to go after all of them. Putting those guys and gals in those positions, I think, is unfair. You're just setting them up for failure. I'm a big proponent of the belief that, public adjusters are required. Last time I checked, they're required to have an apprenticeship period. I feel that field adjusters should have the same. You should be required to have some amount of time in the business before you get sent out to be the first line of defense for your client.
I think it comes up to a shortage of labor.
It does.
You have to have some boots on the ground, so you're going to take anything that comes in the door. And
especially during
that's not a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how can you say, well, we're going to require you to give X amount of time as a trainee before we send you out, but we just got a major event. And by the way, there was 2 other events, one in South Carolina and one in Louisiana, that's pulling resources.
Yeah.
So it's tough. That's not lost on me either. But, the field adjuster role, I've always seen it as, one, you're the first person that the policyholder gets to speak to, aside from, the call center or the intake. You're the first person-to-person interaction that policyholder has. The degree of suffering may be different for the policyholder, but you are the first. You are the carrier at that point. Yep. And for your client, you are the first line of defense, right? If they're represented. You're the first person that gets to see that loss closest to the date of loss. If you don't document that loss properly and it gets litigated down the road 8 months, a year, 2 years after, you either have what your client needs to assert those defenses, or you don't have what they need. And that really comes down to the field adjuster. Training is critical. It's critical, especially in markets like ours, and I would say that training needs to be possibly a little bit different than other areas. There needs to be a little bit more understanding, not just about houses and how they're built and the policy and things like that, but the more intricate nuances, like what you do or don't do on the front end has repercussions.
And even cultural differences, like you said.
Yeah.
Those types of things. So let me go back. You said earlier there's just not adequate communication between the QA and the field person. Is it a technology thing? Is it a work overload thing? Is it a protocol thing? Or, why do you not have that type of communication? And what can be done to make that easier and a more rigorous part of the process? And I'll tell you, kind of, again, when I see that the team lead guy was really hands-on and it was there as that coaching, a QA, what I've seen is, especially now that they get paid on a per file basis, and I'm not saying all of them, but I know a large part of them do, it's just to push the file through. And, you're looking for grammatical errors, you're cleaning up, crossing the T's and dotting the I, but it's not a coaching position like it used to be. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say that in my experience with, QA, obviously it's metrics, right? Did you make contact within 24 hours? Did you, whatever those metrics may be. But we're looking at those metrics, but those metrics don't minimize, the litigious exposure, which is really what's killing our markets, right? If we're saying that, there's too many lawsuits, yes, there may be in fact too many frivolous lawsuits, but there's also the lawsuits that are warranted, right? And what can we do to minimize those and let the legislature or whatever, take care of those frivolous ones? But what are we doing about the ones that are self-inflicted, right? And simply checking off whether that adjuster made contact within 24 hours is not doing anything for you, right? So what can we do, whether it's from a team lead role or a QA role? Are we just checking off metrics, or are we looking at what was done, by the adjuster, either at the inspection, by what they documented or didn't document, by what they wrote in the notes, by what they said to the policyholder? What aspects of the front end claims handling led us into litigation that probably would not have otherwise happened were it not for our own actions? And are we taking those opportunities as a teaching lesson? In my experience, we're not, or not enough for the markets that we operate in.
It's an interesting thing that you said there was checking a box to see if the insured was contacted within 24 hours. And I've always said that cycle time is such a misleading indicator. And people talk about, our cycle time is, 3 days, or, our insured contact time is 24 hours, and, time to inspection is 3 days or whatever. And I see those numbers get manipulated all the time.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it especially in a cat situation, it's really, you have to throw those numbers out of the window because they're impossible to meet. And it should really be a triage approach to it, where you're making, you're prioritizing the folks that are out of their house and they're displaced. And I haven't seen really any effort being put into assessing and prioritizing. And given the fact that the industry is suffering from lack of resources, if you can preserve those resources and, use them where you really need them, that's where we need to evolve as an industry. But yeah, I mean, why are people looking back at cycle time and saying, hey, we did a good job? And they don't look at the actual content of the claim. And, okay, so you talked to them within 24 hours, but what did you say?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And it doesn't, it can't be a script either, right? But, while you were talking, I just kind of jotted down 2 points here. We're on the topic of metrics. A lot of times when I see, the file was returned in 72 hours, or we want the file back within 3 days of inspection. Oh, you just sent that guy out on a large loss fire. You don't want that file back in 3 days. Yeah. And if you're getting it back in 3 days, I want to see it. And so does plaintiff's counsel, because they're going to pick that apart. They're going to see what you missed. So, there's pros and cons for every approach. I understand the need, in terms of the ability to make things scalable. You have to have set parameters, and I understand all those concepts. I understand the need for that. But it's a double-edged sword sometimes,
That's a great point.
It's a double-edged sword. Sometimes your desire to meet particular metrics are actually to your own detriment. And a lot of times the field adjusters are so pressed to conform to what those metrics are, that doesn't occur to them to pick up the phone and say, hey, this is a large loss. I'm not going to get this in 72 hours. I need at least a week and a half to put this together. I may have to go back to the property and check this thing or check that thing. Let's when we get that file in, that file needs to be as complete as possible, specifically on those high dollar, high exposure losses. If you're looking at a P-trap, get that file in 3 days. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But, it's the first time I've ever, it's so obvious to hear you say that, but, as a systems guy, the first thing I start thinking of is, hey, make your file handling guidelines variable based on event severity and peril.
Yeah,
You
or
know,
perhaps even on severity, you know what I mean? And that was always something that kind of perplexed me, right? Cost center sets the severity. The first notice of loss goes out with a severity rating. How do you
it,
know?
it's almost always wrong.
How do you know?
It's better not to set anything than to set it wrong. Right.
Let the field
Yeah.
adjusters set that severity when they set their reserves, you know,
Yeah.
and maybe
Yeah.
setting the severity sets the tier of metrics. Yeah, and going back to what we discussed about the training, you know, you take some of these girls and guys in that don't have any experience, you put them through a 1 week or 2 week or even a month-long training, right? And you send them out into the field. They walk into a property that's damaged, they look at it. From a contractor's perspective, I could give you a pretty good ballpark figure of where that loss is going to fall. But a lot of these people can't. You know, they'll go out there and they're like 5,000. You know, I have no idea, right? So
have you listened to my first podcast?
Is that the one with Tim?
Yes, it was the one with Tim, and maybe it's not that one, but in one of these, and I'm not going to tell the story again, but it's the story about my very first loss assessment as a property adjuster, because I was always a casualty guy until my then employer got the contract with State Farm, and all of a sudden everybody became a property adjuster, and I had the State Farm certifications. It doesn't teach you shit, and I'm going to use that word for the practicality of what you do when you get there. I got into it. It was an apartment complex, and I was just, I had absolutely no idea. And it's sad to say, but it's almost identical to what you said.
Yeah, I mean, you know, these new people that are coming into the industry, they're like, congrats, you know, you went through training.
Yeah.
You're going out to Tulsa, Oklahoma to do an F4 twister, and they get out there and they're like,
it's like studying a book to do brain surgery, and then all of a sudden going in and doing brain surgery. I mean, it really is. It's that's where the concept of the ride along is so important.
Yeah, the carriers are like, well, make sure you set adequate reserves, you know, because it impacts our ratios, and they're like, half the house is gone, 5,000, you know, like. Yeah, come on, guys. There has to be a better way.
Yeah, we got to do better than that. You know, if you can give me 1, 2, 3 things that we need to do to get better as an industry, what might those things be?
You know, I think first and foremost is training for the market that you're in. You know, specifically on your daily claims. You know, there's, like you said, CAT is a completely different animal. It should be considered a completely different profession, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that's an entirely different animal.
Such a good point.
You know, the training for the market that you're in, understanding the client, the consumer, right? Point number 2 is piggybacking off of the training is doing a better job of teaching our front end adjusters. You know, what are the implications of their actions and inactions, right? Specifically in markets that are litigious in nature, right? The consumer and the policyholder representatives, they are quite savvy. If you give an opportunity for them to kind of expand on the scope, if they feel that it's warranted, they're going to expand that scope if they feel that it's warranted. And if you don't have the documentation to support your position, then you're going to get litigated. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And then, you know, number 3, I would say, Thomas, is being a little bit more aware of who we're hiring, right? Is it everybody deserves an opportunity, but we have to be more aware of who we're sending out based on the type of loss that we're looking at, right? We talked earlier about the reduction in pay and how that's kind of pushed some of those more experienced guys out. I think we are doing ourselves a disservice. You know, I always make the analogy of Patrick Mahomes. You're not going to pay Patrick Mahomes the same that you're gonna pay a rookie coming into the NFL, even though they're doing the same job, right? I mean, same thing, same concept applies here. You know, if you're going to send out a new adjuster to a large loss fire, one, you're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Right. you should probably pay that adjuster that has the experience and knows what they're doing, because that's gonna that initial investment up front should realize you some savings on the back end.
There's a good bit of economic theory in there that, has to do with doing the most good with a limited amount of resources. And so if you don't do capacity planning and management, you don't understand when to use your most valued resource. And then you end up sending someone unqualified on a large loss. That type of thing. I think structurally, the industry needs to do a lot better. And we won't have time to get into this today, but I honestly would like to have a follow-up conversation with you, because do you know offhand how many IA firm vendors that Florida Citizens uses today?
I don't.
It's more than 10, and it's more than 20, and it might even be more than 30. I don't know that, but I want to say the last time I know that it was close to 20, and it might have been closer to 30. And to me, when you have that many, I mean, think about each one of those guys is going to have X number of really talented adjusters, and they get diluted, and you lose control of the ability to make the connection between this claim and that adjuster, because you now go from the entity, the carrier, to a TPA, to one of 10, 20, 30, 40 maybe IA firms, and then you got to go down to the level of that resource. So what's the chance that that claim is going to meet that right resource when there's such a hierarchy and a dispersion of that talent? And
absolutely. 100%. I mean, that a lot of that, in my opinion, comes down to planning on the carrier's part, making sure that you understand each and every single one of your resources and what they have available to you.
100%.
And making sure that, there's not overlap. You got 20 or 30 IA firms, there's a finite pool of people to choose from, and everybody can't possibly have 500 individual bodies to offer.
Right.
There is going to be some overlap. So understanding who your resources are and what their resources are, really, I think, goes a long way into a successful deployment. And that, like everything else, requires a lot of planning on the front end. I've been in meetings where clients have done a phenomenal job of really trying to hone down who they have where and who can offer what. And I've experienced the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's like, kind of like a deer in headlights until it hits, and it's like, okay, you guys are on. Help.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
Frozen.
I see it. There really is. I call it the good, bad, and the ugly, and there's plenty of all of it to go around. All right, Jonathan. Well, I kept you for a good bit more than an hour here today. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and it's absolutely nice to have met you, and it's good that it was in the way that we did.
Yeah, Thomas. Anytime, man. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I enjoyed it. Great source of information here.
Thank you.
Good talking to you. Okay, bye. Take care.